Hey everybody. Well, just like you guys, I've got my Mark IV. Excited about the one button takedown, breakdown feature they have, but picked this gun up on Friday. It's Monday, and I have yet to fire it, but am horribly disappointed with the trigger, just like all Mark series pistols. This is my fourth, and they all suck. Fortunately, we got a company called Volquartsen that makes wonderful aftermarket trigger groups for these guns. Unfortunately, the Mark IV series, so they say, is not compatible. They're wrong. It is compatible, and I've done it. Excuse me. Excuse the video. I'm rushing to get this on and get this posted to YouTube so you guys can all see it. I've seen the letter from Volquartsen that says that their kits won't work, and there's only one or two non-trigger related parts that do fit, the rails and grips and whatnot. But let's start with talking about the Mark IV in general. As you can see, it's already fully stripped, mostly stripped. I've got a few things still in there. The bolt release is still in there. One thing I do like about the Mark IV is this little guy here, and if you guys do take your pistols apart and take your grips off, be careful. It's a magazine ejector here, and it is under quite a bit of tension, and you will easily lose those parts if you're not careful. So be mindful of that when you take your grips off for the first time. Parts will go flying. Here is the factory trigger, bushing, magazine disconnect. Completely different from the original Mark III, Mark II, Mark I series. You can see the trigger or the magazine disconnect straddles the hammer now. They've narrowed the hammer there where that happens, which is probably why the Volquartsen says their kit won't work. It's a pretty easy fix. We'll get to that in a little bit. But that's the trigger. Compared to, here is the trigger from, this is the Volquartsen trigger here. Basically the same. You can see where they narrowed it out there. Sorry for the video, guys. Everything's pretty much the same. The one thing I don't like about the new one, if you're not careful, the hammer strut pin is not staked or secured, and it can fall out of there. So be mindful of that if you're taking these things apart. So my goal was to remove the magazine disconnector, which is one of the reasons why we buy the Mark II kits for the Mark III pistols. Secondly, obviously, to clean up the trigger. The only things that I did find that were 100% identical was this is the Volquartsen trigger, disconnector, plunger, and spring. It is identical to the new Mark IV. There's the Mark IV, and here is a Volquartsen out of a Mark III. Mark II would work just the same. These parts are identical. They are the only identical parts in this entire firearm. The bolt release is not, so those of you that want an extended bolt release, you're going to have to wait for that. Wait for somebody to come out with that, because it is not the same. And there's a couple other things that are different in here. The trigger pin retaining spring's a little bit different. I think it's a little easier to use, but it does like to fall out of there. So it's right there now versus that long arcing spring from the previous version. My dirty Mark III, but you can see it's got that long bowed spring in there. But enough about all that. We want to talk about the trigger and getting the Volquartsen trigger into the Mark IV. Here's the Volquartsen trigger. Volquartsen Mark II hammer, or that's the hammer, not the trigger. Mark II hammer bushing so that we don't use a disconnector. And the Mark II or III sear. There's a big difference between the Mark IV sear and the Mark II and III sear. You can see there. I have no idea what this lug does. I watched this thing dry fire 100 times, trying to size this thing up and see what I can do and where the issues were. I find no purpose for this lug on the bottom of this sear. Other than that, they're pretty close size-wise. Got a couple extra notches in here. I think that's clearance for the magazine disconnect and stuff like that. You can see that way they're, oops, this way here. Yeah, that way. They are very, very similar. There we go. So, all that being said, we're not using any of those parts. The only parts from the trigger group that I will be using from the Mark IV is the sear spring. Only because it's a longer spring. If you remember, the Mark IIIs and 2245 lights have an extra pin down there, or the lights have a little retaining pocket for the spring. This one does not. It'll actually lean up right here by the mainspring housing, or little mainspring pocket there. So putting the sear in is pretty much a pain in the butt, just like they usually are. I will tell you that when you put this together, the sear is going to go in like this, and the spring is going to go in like this, with it curled and the short end in towards the center of the firearm. So when you install this guy in here, your sear is going to be here and your spring is going to be here, just like that. So I'm going to pause the video and install this sear real quick. Alright, I've got the sear installed. There's the sear pin, there's the sear spring. You can see quite a bit different than the Mark II or III. That's why I kept the Mark IV spring. There's the sear installed. The tension should hold it. So when you pull it forward, it should have spring tension on it. So after this point, just remember that there's nothing holding the sear pin in, and it will fall out if you turn it sideways and move your finger. So keep an eye on that, or you'll lose your sear and your spring, and if you're messy like me, you'll have to be digging around your bench for it. So now we're going to move on to the trigger install, and the trigger bar, disconnector, and then we'll get that hammer installed, and I'll show you what I did to make that work. Okay, so we got the sear installed. I'm going to take another close-up of this so you guys can see that that is a Mark II, Mark III sear. It does not have that lug on the bottom side like the Mark IV has. So nobody can call BS. Oh, he's just putting it back together and claiming to have the Volquartsen kit in. Well, here's the Mark IV sear. Mark II, Mark III sear. Clearly different. So we're going to move on to the trigger and hammer install. I'm going to not pause this. I'm going to show you the whole thing. I'll probably fumble through it a little bit. As you guys know, getting the hammer in there is probably one of the toughest parts by holding everything together. The new Mark IV has an ambidextrous trigger, so it's not just a single pin. This is half of the trigger, the other half is right here, and it's just held together with a screw. It does have tangs on it for orientation that match that part there. We'll get to that in a minute. The only modification that I had to do to this to make it work was none of the factory parts were modified. The only piece that I had to modify was the Volquartsen trigger. Now I took a little bit off of this face here, which in the end I did not need to take it off here. I wasn't sure. I thought I did, but all I needed to do was bevel, chamfer the corners of the front face of this trigger. And it's hard to see. I just did it by hand, nothing fancy. You see that's beveled there, and what was happening is it was rubbing, try to keep from losing my sear, in the corners here where the trigger pocket is. This is a machined aluminum frame, so there's rounded corners from the cutting tools, the end mills. versus the stamped frame has much sharper corners down inside there. It's kind of hard to see, but they are very sharp corners, so there was no clearance issues, whereas the rounded corners did not allow that sear or that trigger to come forward far enough to get the sear engagement with the hammer proper. And I'll show you what you need to look for when you do that. So we're going to start by installing the trigger. I do keep this pin in there. It helps keep that that pin retainer spring in place. Keep an eye on these parts that like to flop around and can fall out. You can see there where there's a vertical plunger spring there now on the bolt release versus a horizontal. The other spring used to lay flat like that. I'll show you that one real quick. Right there, that was the bolt release spring. Also gave you that that slingshot effect that you don't get now on the more 2245 lights. That mod is available. I do my own, real simple. I'll maybe make a video about that later, but excuse me, for now we're talking about the Mark IV and getting that Volquartsen kit in there. So we're going to drop the trigger in there. Again, like I said, the only thing I modified on this trigger was the front face. I got parts all over the place, but here we go. Front face for that trigger, and that is the Volquartsen. You can see the two adjustment screws on there. You can't see that when the gun's assembled. If you're concerned, you know, it is hard coat anodized. There's really no wear or contact on that surface there, so there's no concern for premature wear. The only contact was being caused because of the rounded corners and the square edges here. By relieving those edges, that took care of it. You don't need to go grinding on the entire face like that. A couple swipes with a file, Dremel on that edge is really all you need to do. So, keep from losing my parts here. Get the trigger bar, disconnector there. I don't put the spring and plunger in until I got everything ready to go because I tend to lose them. So we're going to drop the trigger in. Get things lined up. Get that pin through there. There we go. The trigger's installed now because there's no spring. Not going to see it moving, but there's the trigger. And you can see here, you really can't see any. When you pull back, you can look up in there and see, but just looking at the firearm straight on, you really can't see. And if you're unhappy with that, just take a little bit of black Sharpie or enamel paint to it, and that'll take care of it. One of the things I noticed when you look through here, when this trigger bar is pulled all the way back, you see the pinhole there? You want that pinhole right to the left edge of the hole in that disconnector. That was what was causing me some problems early on before I figured it out, because when this trigger couldn't come forward, it was sitting about right here and wasn't given enough travel on the sear. So moving on, I'm going to flip the sear forward and let it catch the... Oh wait, I gotta put the spring and plunger in first. Let's do that. Here's the spring. This is the Volquartsen spring and plunger. You can see it's silver versus black. Spring and plungers in. Flip that sear forward, come down, catch it with the disconnector. There we go. Now we got everything we need. Like I said, keep an eye on that. You want that left edge of that trigger bar to be right on the edge of that hole there, and everything will be fine. Now to the hammer. This is the Volquartsen hammer with a Mark II bushing. Remember, the Mark III's had a disconnector, a magazine disconnect, that nobody wants, nobody cared for. I would assume this kit would, or this method might work if you did want to keep your magazine disconnect. but I don't. So here we go. Looking at the firearm, I'm going to have the firearm facing me, and the hammer's going to go in like that, struts on the back edge. I'm going to install the bushing from the right side in. Okay, one of the problems I was noticing was that little flange there was catching on the disconnector and not giving, it was just kind of screwing up the timing. So I put it on the left side or the right side, looking at it this way, and everything seems to work okay. If you put it on the right side, it kind of tended to hang up on that that little flange there. By putting it this way, no problems. So moving on, the original safety mechanism for the firearm, I put that in first. Kind of snake that in there. It's kind of hard to watch this through the video, so if the firearm goes off of camera, that's my fault. But you gotta get those holes lined up. Bring the sear forward so the safety can drop in there, and get them holes lined up right there. And we're going to drop that safety pin through. Again, it's a full safety throw lever now without just a single pin, because it's ambidextrous. So we're going to drop that in, and that's going to hold everything together for us. Yeah, there we go. You know, if you guys have had Mark IIs, 3s, 2245s in the past, be mindful of that spring and plunger there. They like to fall out. There is a little bit of grease in there that helps hold them together. I put a little bit of black graphite grease in there to keep it in there a little bit better. Doesn't hurt nothing. So now we got our hammer. I'm gonna drop it into our disconnector, and make sure that strut does fall into the mainspring. You can see the mainspring right there, that little silver dot. Make sure the strut is hitting the mainspring, or else, you know, just like the old style firearm, you'll have problems. This is the hard part, doing it without putting it in the vise. You got to pull that hammer forward a little bit, or the sear forward a little bit, so that all this stuff can drop in together. And make sure you got the safety pin just flush with that safety mechanism, so everything can drop down and line up. Now I like to run an Allen wrench through here, pop that out, and then come back through with everything. Now it's aligned, you can come back through a little easier, wiggle things around till things start. Look at there, see, that's about to fall out of there, so you guys want to be careful about that. Start wiggling things around, get the bushing and the holes, everything lined up. Okay, make sure the safety's where it needs to be. Come around, get this started there. Okay, now you just got to come here. You like to use Allen wrenches. Push that plunger in. That should drop in there. Actuate that safety up and down a couple times till it finds a hole in the safety mechanism, and that's it. Working safety. And cock the hammer. I'm going to keep my hand on the safety because I don't want that falling out, but there we go. Fire. Still holding the trigger. Reset. Fire. Reset. Fire. That's it, everybody. Volquartsen hammer, sear, Mark II bushing, Volquartsen trigger. I gotta believe this will work with a tandem cross trigger also, which I kind of prefer the flat face tandem cross trigger. I have that in my 2245 light speed gun with the Volquartsen parts. So I'm going to put this gun back together completely so you guys can see everything, and we'll talk a little bit more then. Now, real quick before I finish putting this back together, something else I wanted to show you guys. In doing this and removing the magazine disconnect The hammer doesn't have a whole lot of side-to-side play, but what it does have would be the thickness roughly of one leg of that magazine disconnect. The solution for that would be one of two things. I don't think it would cause problems. It's really not that bad. One of two solutions. This trigger bar here, this disconnector, you can see it's got a slight curve to the top here, and that's there for a reason, to take up slop there. You could bend that trigger bar disconnector over just a little bit more, or the other thing you could do, and I was going to do this, I've got this washer here that I have found out in the garage. It just, oh, dropped it. Well, I was going to slide that in between the disconnector and the hammer, but the problem I found was, and I'll just show you on the original hammer, is that it was too large a diameter and actually interfered with the engagement of the sear on that notch there. So if you do decide to put a washer in there, I'd suggest getting obviously a stainless steel washer, no larger than 3/8 diameter, 1/4 inch hole, and 30 to 40 thousandths thick. I would stone it both sides, polish it up, make it smooth and shiny, because it's just another moving part to create friction and degrade your trigger. This trigger, it's nice. It's, you know, just as good as any other Volquartsen. I'd say it's 1.5 pounds. I don't have a trigger pull meter, but it's nice. Obviously I got some take up and free travel and over travel adjustment I can still do to this gun, but we'll finish getting it put back together here. I just wanted to show you that little gap there. Again, I don't think long term it's really an issue, but that's what we have. Okay, here you have it, a fully functional Mark IV Ruger target with Volquartsen trigger, hammer, sear. Working great. Safety functions. That still works where you can't break it down if it's not unsafe. Magazine's empty. So here's the big thing. Magazine is out. No magazine in the firearm. No bullet. If you need to safety check a firearm when you're doing a video, you're an idiot anyway, but I want to show you, magazine disconnector is completely removed. Reset. Oh, fire. Reset, fire. Reset, fire. I don't think that you can even cock this firearm without a magazine when the safety disconnector is functioning. Whether or not you want that in there, that's up to you. With the method I just showed you, you ain't gonna get it. So there you go. Safety does work. No concerns there. Put the safety off. Fire. Cock it. Reset. Safety on. Safety off. There you go, guys. Enjoy. Don't waste your money. Don't let Volquartsen, it's late, fool you. I got a feeling they're probably in bed with Smith & Wesson over this one. There was absolutely no reason for them to change the trigger in this firearm and make it worse than it already was, other than for Volquartsen to design a new trigger and charge everybody for it. So enjoy, have fun with your new Mark IVs, and shoot safe.